Welcome to part 5 of the floating logo sign tutorial. This will be the last part of the series. There will still be other videos that I'm going to make after this to do some other examples of the design. Those may be a little faster paced, and I'll point out anything that that's good to know with more complex designs. Obviously, this one's pretty simple, and I chose it to be that way just for the initial tutorial. But I will do a couple more that are a little more advanced just to show you more of the thought process and the workflow. You can go through the first videos to get a better understanding of where we're at, but this will still be a good standalone video for any design going from Fusion 360 to Blender for rendering. So we will get started with the actual exporting in Fusion 360. Before we do that, we've got a couple more things to do. I did go ahead and design the standoffs and the inserts for all of the holes. That way they can be exported into Blender as well and be part of the render, just to make it look a little nicer. So since we added those, let's go ahead and add the appearances to those so that they transfer over to Blender. So we'll hit A for appearance. And you can see over here where I made the insert and standoff component. Within that component, I have a couple of parent folders in there as well that hold the individual bodies. And that way, again, I can drag the material over to the entire folder and it will apply that material to all. So we can go to Fusion Appearances. And it does not matter at all what you choose over here. We can do glass frosted for the inserts. Really, you're just looking for the name to transfer over, and that way it keeps track over in Blender, which you'll see more what I mean when we get there. And then we can just do, just to really distinguish this, we'll go to plastic, transparent, and we'll do the acrylic clear. And that'll be for the standoffs. So you can see that that applied well. That is it for the appearances. Again, you can hit Shift N to cycle back out and make sure that everything looks good, which it does. The last step before we actually go to export this will be to get the kickstand out. I hit Enter there to confirm that, and now whenever we export, it'll export with the kickstand out. You don't have to do any rigging or anything like that in Blender, which isn't super hard, but it's it's a topic for another video within Blender, especially if you're not super familiar with Blender. So that's it in Fusion 360. We will go up to File and Export, and I like to export as an FBX. I found that that's the best file type to import into Blender, as it keeps all the materials, it keeps the naming scheme, and it brings in everything separated. The only downside to this is that you can see right here that it does require cloud translation, which for me takes maybe 20-30 seconds, so I think it's worth the time saved in Blender. But if you don't have a good internet connection, or if this is taking a longer time for you, you can export in OBJ. The only thing that you'll have to do extra in Blender is actually separate the parts, but it will bring over the color data, it'll bring over the naming convention, so you'll just have to separate all the parts manually, which is not hard at all to do. So I have a location on my computer, I've got a floating logo signs folder, and I've got my tutorial here, so that looks good, and we will hit export. See how long this takes. Okay, yeah, that took about 30 seconds. So again, easier to wait the 30 seconds and have a more compatible file type. I do wish that they would bring that out of cloud translation. I don't know how necessary that is. OBJ used to be the same way, if I can recall, and they just brought that over to local export, which now it's instant. So, but for now, that'll work. So we will get out of Fusion 360 and we will bring up Blender. I'm not going to assume that everyone has experience in Blender. It is kind of a overwhelming software, but it's insanely powerful. I've got probably a couple years into Blender, and I'm I maybe know 20%, 30% of what this program offers. So there's a lot to it. So we're just going to focus on the exact steps to do this. Again, does not have to be the floating logo sign. This will work on any design coming from Fusion. But we're just going to work on initial setup just for this rendering portion. And we're not really going to dive into anything else because we could spend hours and hours and hours on Blender. There's loads of good tutorials out there, and I may end up doing some in the future as well. So we'll just focus on the rendering of this sign on this. So the first thing that we're going to look at is just basic setup of Blender and your scene, just to make sure that you are rendering as quickly as you can and high quality as you can. This is all based on your computer, so if you have a slower computer, it's just going to be slower. But I will go through my settings here, and on the right hand side you will see your settings window over here, and we'll start out at render. So click on this render tab, and I always render through cycles. Lighting looks a lot better in cycles versus Eevee. And change this to GPU compute. That way it uses your graphics card to render instead of your CPU, which is always going to be faster no matter what. Even if you have a bad graphics card and a great CPU, it's probably still going to be faster. So GPU compute. And we will go down here to sampling. Sampling is how many samples and computations the render engine is going to use to create your render. So viewport is where we're at right now. This is your viewport. We don't need a lot of samples here because it's just going to slow down your computer. So I have it set to 20. You could set it to like 50. Doesn't matter. Just the more you set it, the more taxing it's going to be on your computer as you're just playing around with the design. And then under render is where it's actually going to sample for your final render. So I have that on 250, which seems like it's good enough. If you see that it's not good enough, you can always come in here and change that, but that works for me. A lot of other settings in here you can go through as you get more comfortable with it, but right now we're just going to stick with those. Those are the basic for render settings. Next, we will go down to scene and make sure that you are on metric, and then change the unit scale to 0.001, and that will verify that all of your designs are on a millimeter scale. And you'll also come in here for length and make sure that that's on millimeters. And we'll see, I'll show you a way that you can double check your sign to make sure that it's accurate. Doesn't really matter. Again, we're just going for a render, and you don't have anything in this scene that it's going to be compared to, but it's good practice to start understanding that anything you do in Blender, it makes sense to have it at somewhat the right scale. And that way, any of your transformations, any of your light settings, they all make sense, right? If you're doing things in crazy scales, then you're just going to be kind of all over the place, and eventually you're going to cause more frustration for yourself than it's worth. So start out doing, using good practices, and that'll just develop further the more you use this program. Next, we will go ahead and import our file. Go up here to File, Import, and FBX. We'll navigate to our folder that we saved it in. Select it, import FBX. You will have to scroll out some. And before we get started with anything on the sign itself, I do want to go through, you can see what's happening where it's kind of clipping here. And there's another setting that we're going to adjust. It's going to be up here in this View tab. And you can see the end is 1,000 millimeters. That means that 1,000 millimeters, anything past that is going to start clipping. And that's just saving resources for Blender to, compute all of that if it doesn't need to. I'm going to go up here and I'm going to add one more zero, so 10,000. And you can see that we can see much further out. And that's nice because now you can go really far out without this thing clipping. Okay. And we can hide this. You can hit in as in November to hide that view bar if you need it. Okay. And you can see what I was saying. Middle, your scroll wheel, middle click will orbit you around just like in Fusion if you have it set up that way, which I do. And you can see that it brought in our colors. They're not perfect, and that's okay. We don't need them to be perfect. We're going to go through and actually change them to the exact hex code, which is also very easy. But you can see that we have our Z here. It brought it in upside down. So what we'll do with the entire thing selected still, let's say that if you deselect it all, they do come in as different components. So you'll just go and go up here to select, box select, select all, and then you can manipulate it like that. So on your numpad, you have 1, 3, and 7, which are going to take you to orthographic views. So 1 is going to take you to the front, 3 to the side, the right side, 7 to a top view. So I'm going to go 3 to the right side. I still have everything selected. I'm going to hit R for rotate. Then you can just use your mouse to rotate this, and you can use your guidelines down at the bottom to try and get it on the same plane, the kickstand and the base. That looks pretty good right there. And then we're going to hit G. G is to move. I always think of G for grab. So G. And then you see how we can move it anywhere. If you hit Z after G, it will constrain it to the Z axis. And you can move it up onto here, about right there, and click to confirm. Okay, there we go. And we'll hit Shift A, which is going to be your add object mode. Or you can go up here to add, and you have the same menu up here. We'll go to mesh, plane. You can't see the plane, it's very small right now, so it is selected. When it comes in selected. Hit S for scale, and then you can just move your mouse. The cool thing about Blender is that you can just keep constantly moving it, and it's gonna stay, it's just gonna continue doing that. You can click again, hit S again, then it'll scale much quicker because it's much bigger already. So we'll just do a nice big plane like that. This will be basically our photo backdrop. Okay. So that looks good. We're going to do a little bit more scene setup before we get over to the colors. I hit Shift A again for adding a component. And we're going to go ahead and add our camera. Again, the camera is going to come in here. It's pretty small. You can hit Control Alt 0. And what that will do is it will put your camera view exactly where your current view is. If you hit N again to bring this bar back out, and you go to view, you can do camera to view. And that will now, whenever you scroll or you manipulate your view, it's going to keep the camera up. And your camera shortcut for turning on and turning off is going to be 0 on the numpad. So that looks pretty good. And we'll hit 0 to get out of the camera view, but you can see that our camera is still right there. Anytime you want to go back into your camera to see how it looks, just hit 0 and it'll bring you back. Okay. Now we are going to go up here to render view. Render view is it's called viewport shading. This is going to show you kind of exactly what it's going to look like when it's rendered. So you can see it's pretty fuzzy, and that's because it's doing its render. Again, you can see as I move around, you can see up here the sampling, and I have it set to 20 so that it's not just killing my computer for no reason. I'm going to go over here to world, and world is, I have an HDR that gets loaded automatically, but a lot of times I don't like using that. So no matter what you have loaded, you can just go to strength and go to 0. Now we have a completely dark world. And then we'll do Shift A for add. We'll add a light, and we're going to add an area light. Again, it comes in selected. G for move, G for grab, Z, bring it up, and then S, we're going to scale it up. And again, it's not very bright right now. You can do one of two things. You can right click on the light and adjust light power. Just single click this, and then you can just move your mouse to the right, just like this, and it starts bringing it up. Another thing you can do is select your light, come over here to your light data properties, and you can adjust your power here. So this is 14 milliwatts. Let's just do 1 watt. Okay, that's pretty bright, but another thing you can do is you can just G, Z, bring your light higher so it's not as... Okay, and that already looks pretty good. So now that we have the light set up, and you can come in here, again, 1, 3, and 7, right, to go into your orthographic views. You can, let's say we go to 7 for the top-down view. Scroll out a little bit. I like to do most of my precision movement in one of these orthographic views because that ensures that you're only doing the movement on this plane. Right now, we're only moving on the XY plane. We're not moving in the Z direction, so you know that your camera is staying at the height that you set it at. So you can select your camera, hit Z or G for grab, and you can move your light around however you want. I'm a big fan of, dramatic lighting. So a lot of times I'll come off over here to the side. You can hit 1 for the straight on view. Do the same thing. You can hit R for rotate. Rotate your light. And that may be a little dark. We'll hit G for grab. Something like that. Let's go back up to 7 and move it a little bit towards the front. And then rotate. Okay. Now you can hit 0 to go back to your camera view, and I think that looks pretty cool. So now that we have our view how we want it, get out of that by hitting 0, and we'll come in and we'll start doing these colors. So you don't necessarily have to select each component to do the colors. Again, it brings with the FBX, it brings in the data material or the data for the material. So you can come over here to this material tab. I will show you on my other monitor. I do still have the vectorizer, which has the color data and everything from the image that I put in. I put that image in from Wikipedia, I think. If you're really, really worried about it, you can go directly to the team's website, and they will have the most accurate representation of color. But I think this will work fine. And I keep this up on the other monitor because we can choose our colors using the eyedropper in Blender. So in this color area over here for base color, we will select, actually before you do that, let's just get rid of this metallic because it's not a metallic color, but you can always, you can make this look however you want. The roughness, you can adjust however you feel it looks the best. And I'm going to take this base color, click on the color itself, and then this little eyedropper. Take that eyedropper, we'll move it over to the other monitor and just select the green. So that will select the exact same hex color that your image shows. And then we can go through and do the exact same thing. We'll do it for tan, eyedropper over to tan, yellow. Now you can see this one has two components, but they're both assigned the same material. So if we make a change to this material, it's going to update on both. So we'll go to yellow, bring over the eyedropper, and then white is white. I'm not going to worry about that one. So that looks good. We have all the colors assigned. For these two, we'll go to the insert. And we're going to change this from principled BSDF to a translucent. Again, I usually print these with a clear TPU. So, results in kind of a translucent, definitely not transparent. So that's fine. Or you can change it to whatever color you're planning on printing it. And then we'll select the standoffs. Instead of principled BSDF, we will go to refraction BSDF. And here, we'll bring the roughness all the way to 0. And you can see how that results in a really, really nice acrylic material. It even has the pass-through information for what's behind it. Okay. And as far as materials is concerned, I think that looks pretty cool. And actually, this is a pretty cool shot here. So you could go, 0, and then come in, do something like this, a little more dramatic. Again, you can set it up exactly how you want to set it up. I think that looks pretty cool. I think I'll stay there. And that is about it. At this point, you can hit F12, or you can go up here to render and render image. Right now, I can tell you that if you see this checkerboard pattern, that means that it is not going to render. This is going to be transparent. It's not going to render that. So that could be really cool for if you were going to bring this render in and composite it onto like a photo of a table that you already have, right? You can bring it in, you can set it right on that table. In our case, I don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this plane. I'm going to go into edit mode, which you can go up here from object to edit mode or hit tab. And then I'm going to go to select mode, edge. Let's get out of the camera by hitting 0. And I'm going to hold down shift. I'm going to select both of those edges, E for extrude, Z to, right now you can see that you can shear this. Z will constrain it to the Z axis. And we'll just bring that up, quite a bit. And then that way, when we go back to our camera, actually, you know what's happening. So we did our adjustment for the clipping up here. That's for the scene itself. You also have another clipping adjustment for your camera. Okay, if we hit tab or come back up here and go back into object mode, we can select our camera. And in the camera data options, you can see another clipping part here. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to add 1, 0 here. And now you can see that it extends further. The view extends further. So we've got our walls back there. And from this point, you're pretty much done. It's there's a lot more that can go into it, but for a very simple start to how to do this, I think that's pretty good. So set it up how you want it. I'm going to do something dramatic like that. And then hit F12 or go up here to render image. And you'll see, remember we set it to 250. It's going to do 250 samples up here. And again, it all depends on the quality of your computer, graphics card. You can see right here, we've got a little gap here. So maybe we go in there and just lower this whole thing a little bit more to where it's contacting. But that's it. There's the render. Another cool thing that you can do is right here. This is our render for slot 1. So let's go to slot 2, which will be blank. And then we can move this around, do some sort of other angle. Let's say we want to just do that. We'll do F12. And that's going to render that into slot 2. And what I'm seeing is, I think there's still a lot of metallic being applied to the red and yellow and probably the white as well. So I'm going to go in there and change that real quick. The red material, yep. Bring that metallic all the way down. I'm going to bring the roughness up a bit. Do the same with that's why that yellow is looking so muted. Do the same with the white, bring the metallic all the way down, and same with the tan. There we go. That's a much more accurate representation of what we're looking for. So let's hit F12 to replace that. We're still in, let's see if we go back to this, we're still in slot 2. So if you stay in that slot and you re-render it, it's going to replace that. So we'll go F12. and that looks much better to me. A much more accurate look at what it's gonna actually look like. Okay, that's it. And then you can go up here to image and save, and you can just save that image to wherever you want, or save as, and save it to wherever you want, and do as many as you want. And that's the process. You can save this Blender file if you'd like, or you can just keep importing the FBX and doing the setup again. But I definitely recommend saving the blend file if you have the room. That way, if you want to come back and get additional looks in there, you can certainly do so. And the acrylic looks extra cool in these. Let's find a good. Let's try something like that. Do a zoomed in shot. Do F12. You can see the refraction. BSDF is definitely a cool material, and it'll give you a lot of interesting looks. And that's about it. So we'll stop here. Again, this is the end of the actual tutorial series, but I'm gonna do a couple more designs that you guys can walk along, follow along with me, just to see more insight onto the mindset of these designs, how I'm layering, the colors, how I'm doing the offsets, and I'll do a couple more that are a little more complex, and you can get some more insight there. But definitely, get in there and make some of these yourself. Put them up on Maker World, or be sure to tag me or message me, and I'd love to see them. Thanks for joining, and again, if you've learned anything, if this is beneficial, please like, subscribe, comment, all that stuff. Thank you. See you next time.